my name is Jamie Younger. Welcome to the Story Keep podcast, Who We Remember. On this show, I ask my guests a seminal question. Whose life story from your own family would you most want to document on film? My guests can speak about a family member who is living or deceased. This show is an outgrowth of our central mission at Story Keep, where we collaborate with families of wealth to help them preserve their stories and histories through legacy films and private podcasts. Since 2010, we have worked with over 100 families. On this show, we explore the surprising histories and stories of our guests' family members. We speak about each person's essence and what impact they have made. Most of us think way too late about capturing the stories of our loved ones. These conversations elevate, honor, and speak to one person's lasting influence. I promise that you'll walk away feeling inspired to think anew about your own life and the impact that you want to make. Today, I'm joined by Fredda Herz Brown. I'm really delighted to have her on the show. Fredda is a longtime mentor of mine, and she also sits on Story Keep's advisory board. She is one of the wisest and kindest people I know. I'm very excited to have her share her stories about her mom, Selma Nedenberg. Fredda's mother, Selma, is a woman who had a very secretive life in many ways, shandas and sort of shame and a sense of societal non-acceptance, but also so much love. Before we fully step into Selma's story, let me introduce you to Fredda Herz Brown. Fredda grew up in a Jewish family of 5 children. She's the mother of 2 and the grandmother of 7. She originally worked as a nurse and then a psychologist before she founded the family enterprising consulting firm Relative Solutions. As a kid, Fredda was, much like she is today, always raising interesting and at times challenging topics. I'm really looking forward to introducing you to Fredda in this way. Let's dive in. Fredda, it's such a delight to have you on the show. I shared in the intro that you are one of the kindest and wisest people and also a mentor of mine. So it's a real pleasure to talk about your mom. So when I asked you whose life story you would want to document on film, you said your mom. So thanks for coming on. And I would love to hear why you chose her.
Well, I've been thinking about this whole experience, Jamie, and one is that my mother's, as we'll talk about, my mother's life story is not really clear. It's always has little pieces to it, which I want to spend a few minutes talking about, that you just wonder what the real story is. So there's that. And the other part of why I wanted to talk about her is because she was such a great influence in my life and has had a way of interacting with the world that was so purposeful and thoughtful. That I wanted to share that. And I think the third reason, which I only began to be in touch with over the weekend I was reading something, there was a saying in it that said that marking a person's life is by saying their name. And that the more that you say a person's name, the more you acknowledge their existence. And that I think it was something around grief. And I was thinking that's true. And acknowledging her existence by saying her name and by honoring her and remembering her, became much more clear to me. But it also created a tremendous amount of anxiety because that you and I talked about, I generally don't feel anxious in presentations, but all of a sudden thinking about how to remember her became anxiety producing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what do you suppose that was about for you?
I think what it was about is that this would never be something my mother would do, make anything public. And it wasn't until many years later, after she passed away, that I started thinking about why is that there's generally in my family this level of secret keeping, which, is a shanda. And for the viewers who don't know what shanda means, it's a Yiddish term that talks to the issue of being shamed, of a fear of humiliation. And so that you don't talk about parts of yourself or events that have happened to you because they're shameful. They're viewed as shameful. And for many women, I think my mother included, not being able to have children, not completing, education, adoptions, those kinds of things, divorces, all of that was considered to be something that would be shameful for a woman to not have accomplished that. And so those talking publicly about it, talking publicly about my mother who had ways in which is anxiety producing, because it's there where, first of all, it's shifting sands because you don't know what the real is. But the other part is that you never really, our family was fairly large and insulated. And I think the insulation came from part of the need to keep the secrets, keep the little secrets secret. And so doing this, I don't know whether that makes sense to you, but doing this felt a little more anxiety producing to me. Like, oh my goodness, what am I going to say here? Her desire to fit in was so great. And, you edit out half of what you're supposed to be doing, that it would be really awkward for her, I think, to know that I was talking about her in this way.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely get that. We are going to talk about her.
I know.
And
all the reasons I said we're going to talk.
For all the reasons you said and more. And speaking of the quote that you read over the weekend about saying her name, could you say her full name and sort of introduce maybe some of those shandas that made up who she was to you in part?
Yes, thank you. So her name was Selma, Selma Nedenberg Brown. And there was probably another name in there, because one of the things I found out under one of the shandas, and I found it out only on the eve of my own wedding day, was that my mother was married before. And that we used to have this wonderful little photo of her, which I tried to figure out how to show it today, but I couldn't get it off. It was not in a frame on the wall, so I couldn't quite get it off, which as kids, we used to call it my mother's cheesecake photo, because she was so beautiful in this photo, and she was posed in this fairly sexy way. And so we used to call it her cheesecake photo. And she always, when we say, "Whoa, Mom, where was this taken?" She'd say, "Oh, it was when I was down in Florida having a good time." Well, it turns out, that was the photo that was taken of her when she was getting a divorce from her first husband so that she could marry my dad. So that was, that's one of the typical ones. And the other one that I found out when I was in my 20s, that my older sister was adopted, and I was a second child, but a firstborn biological child, which sort of shifted the way you understand your family a little bit. But all of it was, they had my dad and mom had a whole file filled with articles about, do you tell your child they were adopted? Do you not tell your child? It was back and forth and back and forth. So those were like two of the things that she did. But she was a very, very smart woman. And she went to Hunter Prep and was going to go to Hunter College. And her mother used to take money from the household money and put it aside to buy her books and stuff. And her dad discovered that was what had happened and took away the books and said, no daughter of mine is going to get a college education. Girls don't need college educations. And she became really, really committed to being educated herself. And she really did educate herself because she read voraciously as a person. But that partly defined her life was that. And I think the other thing that defined her life and set the future for where she would be was she had a younger sister, 7 years younger than she was. And her sister was born with a deformity and could only walk with a limp. But she became a radio star, singing and doing other whistling, of all things.
Your aunt was a whistler on the radio.
And she whistled, and she also was on the early Ted Mack shows. And she whistled without moving her mouth at all. She didn't pucker her lips. She whistled that way. I mean, I have actually records of her doing this. So she was quite amazing. And she was an interesting character. So Ted Mack Amateur Hour. You know what Ted Mack was? Ted Mack Amateur Hour.
I actually know. And yeah, okay, a precursor to
Ed Sullivan.
Okay. I do know Ed Sullivan. Mm-hmm.
Right. So Ed Sullivan, it was even towards the end of beginning of, I hardly saw Ed Sullivan even as a kid, but you always had young people on, or, and new acts. I've said really popular acts, but new acts. And she was on Ted Mack Amateur Hour. And one of the people she was on with was my father's brother. So here, my mother's life was also defined by schlepping her younger sister around to all of these places to do tryouts and, all that sort of stuff. And in one of those moving around, she met my dad. And so they became connected in that way. Otherwise, I don't know that they ever would have met each other. So a lot of her background was in some ways to sort of keep under wraps who she was, keep under wraps in terms of her sister was the important one, keep under wraps not to be as smart or any of those things as she really was. And I think the Shondas sort of fit in with that. She wasn't good for a Jew to be coming from where they came from. And so, you had to sort of deal with all of those kinds of things. So I think that's who she was as a person. And those defined her early life. I mean, she was born in 1919. So she was, it was during very important times.
So she grew up in this household, and she kind of was, keeping these secrets, but she was this smart woman who obviously passed that on to you because you're also a voracious reader and ended up getting a doctorate. Mm-hmm. So interesting. And who did she then become as a mother to you? What, when you think about, the impact that she made, the things she taught you or impressed upon you?
Yeah, she was an extraordinarily thoughtful and purposeful person. Not that she didn't have her moments, especially during my adolescence when we used to rub each other the wrong way. And there would be nothing that I did that sort of took away from me not quite being the way she might have wanted, the typical adolescent struggle. Mm-hmm. But she really was a very, very thoughtful woman, and she put a lot of energy into her kids. And as I mentioned to you when you and I were talking about her, she wrote us all a letter on her on Mother's Day when we were sort of celebrating her. And I actually have a letter in 1979. So she put all of her energy into her children and put her energy in terms of trying to acknowledge us each as separate people. She never, ever compared us. There were 5 of us, and she never compared. She never said to me, your sister did this, why can't you do that? Or your brother is so bright in this, why can't you do that? She didn't do those kinds of comparisons at all, which really kept down the competition, and she urged collaboration between us. In fact, I think one of the things she did was she had 2 principles, I think, that came across. One was you celebrate each other. You may compete, but you celebrate. You celebrate each of your accomplishments. And till this day, if one of us has an accomplishment of any kind, we're always there for one another. And the second thing that she had was, maybe because she had 5 kids, it was for her own sanity, I'm not really sure, but she had this view that if you asked her to intervene with anybody of your siblings, that she would just say, not me. If you guys can't settle it out, then go upstairs and figure out a way, but don't make your noises down here and yell at each other down here because I'm not helping you. So you need to go up and figure it out. So you'd either give up the fight because it was too hard, or you'd work it out and come back downstairs, and she didn't have to listen to it. So in 1979, she wrote us this note on Mother's Day, which sort of says, I think, I'm just going to read a little bit of it because it sort of says the way she viewed her children were so important to her. This is on 1979, May 13th. To all of you, my children, today is Mother's Day, and I feel that I have to tell you all what a joy it is to be your mother. The joy, happiness that each of you has brought me is unbelievable. I love you all and admire you all. I'm proud of you. Each of you has grown into an adult that I can be proud of having given birth to. You've never given me anything but happiness. I've never been anything but proud to say, this is my son, this is my daughter. And that, it was like that, no matter what, how angry she was at you and how much she disciplined you, that carried the most weight, is that you knew that no matter what, you were the most important. And you notice she didn't say one or the other of us. This was written to all of us because it was, each of us in our own right was really important to her, that we really mattered. She let you know in ways that would be very subtle about how much she cared and admired you. And I never doubted that I could be anything I needed or wanted to be because she was there and she had that support. And she was just extraordinarily purposeful and thinking and cared a lot about how she promoted dynamics and thinking about promoting. I oftentimes think when I'm working with clients, that her way of promoting the collaboration and the belief that you could work it out together would be so helpful for people to have. And I think, I believe in that. And I think mainly it came from her that collaboration is possible. So that's
I have a question in hearing that excerpt from the letter. I don't know where you were in your life and development in 1979, right? But do you remember what you felt reading that letter, or was that so typical of your mom that it was just, oh, that's nice? Or was it, wow, I mean, you still have it. You have the original letter. So what did it mean to you then?
So I remember getting it, and each of us got a copy, actually. She had copies for each of us because she wanted each of us to know how important it was. Like one letter was not going to suffice, right? So, I remember knowing that, sort of sensing that was the way she always felt, but not ever having her say that. She never really would come outright and say how proud. You'd know that she was really proud and that she admired. In fact, pride it's a word, I never say to my grandchildren that I'm proud of them, because I think there's a way in which pride claims a bit of what they've accomplished. And she never would claim a bit of what you accomplished. So it was more admiration. It was like somehow that there was a way in which she admired what you had become and that she felt greatness about that. But she had never expressed that so directly. So I think the reason I saved it was because it's the first time I ever heard her outright say, I admire who you've become. It really is really important. And I think it's so important for people to know that their parents admire them. And I think about it now that I've read that letter again, and I fully appreciated reading it another time or two. The notion of admiration is so important. It's not so much the pride, but it's the admiration. Being able to say, I really admire who you've become and I appreciate it, is really an important thing. So I read it to my sister the other day, my younger sister, and she said that she remembered it also. So I haven't talked to my brothers about it, but it was a very important time because she doesn't put words to it.
Yeah, when you think about, like you said, you knew those things, but somehow different forms of documentation, they crystallize, they concretize something, and there is a value in that. And I guess I've always been driven by that as well, that of course you want to express that in the moment to people and you want to say it directly to them, but also having something in a sense that's tangible has its own value.
Yeah, I was thinking about it in terms of remembering her and how she would want to be remembered. And I think the way she'd want to be remembered is what she left in terms of the tangible things. And what she would have done with that opportunity to talk about what she felt like her ethical will, so to speak. What would she say? And I think she would say, as much as she tried to guide us, she would never tell you what to do. Even as an adult, I would think Sunday evenings was a time I would oftentimes call her and check in for the week, etc. And whatever I would talk over with her, any issue, she never would say, here's what you should do, or do this, or do that, or I don't know why you didn't do this. Never. It would always be trying to broaden your perspective of something, like, well, had you thought about it this way? Or, there's another way to do this. And that sort of giving of herself and providing you with a sense of, here's some things to think about, and trusting that you would think about it and come up with what was best for you. That, I think, would be something that she would say about herself, is that she never told you what to do or where to go. She would try to provide you with some sense of freedom and some sense of here's some alternatives. And there probably isn't any, right? And I remember her saying to me, you'll know after you think about it what's best for you. But I can't tell you what's the best solution for you. You'll know. But, just think about it and and provide yourself with other opportunities. And then that always was clear to me.
Yeah.
And it was and I think the opportunity to be remembered, to have her name said, to have her children and her grandchildren embody those things that were important to her, I think would be the best remembrance of her that she would want. That would be really, really important.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like, considering who she was in whole, that if you had approached her with the opportunity to have her life story documented, she probably wouldn't have gone with that. But to kind of am I right in that she would have said, no way?
No, she would have done it. She would have done it much more gracefully. She would have said, oh, darling, thank you so much for the opportunity. But, I think I would pass on it. She wouldn't want to have the documentation because she'd have to be telling you all these stories that are not necessarily right. No, documentation she would want. But she would have a film about sort of her ethical will sort of thing, like what values, those kinds of things she would really be interested in talking about.
Which brings me to, I want to talk about, which you shared earlier with me, basically the good death, in a sense, that she had, a very intentional passing, and that she thought about what she wanted to do in that moment and didn't kind of leave it for, interpretation. Can you talk about that? Because I feel like there are actually quite few good deaths in this sense, that people don't prepare often very well. And I would love for you to share some of that.
Yeah. So my mother didn't die of cancer. She died of congestive heart failure. And for the whole year before she passed away, my dad had predeceased her. And even in that period of time, there was about 6 years between when he died and when she passed away, maybe a little less. But anyway, she used that time pretty intentionally. Everybody thought, oh, she didn't know how to write a check. She didn't know how to do this. She actually did all of it very well. And then when she started getting more and more ill, she started to obviously consider what to do. And she reached a point in the treatment for her illness that she knew it wasn't going to get much better, and that she would be in and out of the hospital getting infusions, et cetera, and that the medication would make her feel sick. And she just didn't really want to she didn't want to go that way. She wanted to choose her time, go peacefully where she still was in connection with people, still could talk with them, didn't have to be sitting there with all sorts of tubes connected, et cetera. And so she basically planned how she wanted to do it. And she did enough thinking ahead of time that she created this was the most amazing thing, because she told me ahead of time that she had written her will, and I shouldn't be disappointed or surprised that I was not going to be named as an executor. I was a living child, eldest living at that time. She said, you're not going to be the executor of my estate. So I don't want you to be surprised. So I thought, oh, that's interesting. I said, so tell me about it. And she said, oh, well, I've been thinking about this. She said, you and your brother, Mark, who's the youngest one, everybody would think that because of your relationship with me, that you would be the executor. But I decided the two people who really needed to be the executors are your other siblings, because they would really resent you telling them what to do. But if they were the executors, they would know what to do. And one of your brother, the two of them get along really, really well. So no issues would come up because they'd work it out. So that's what she did. She made the two siblings who were in the center, the executors, and they did. They worked everything out. They had no hassles with one another. They'd managed it really, really well. And the other thing she did was she decided she wanted to go into hospice, and she arranged for that to happen and went into hospice. And she said she wanted her grandchildren to see her one last time without any tubes or all sorts of equipment around her. And she arranged for that so that they saw her and they could say goodbye to her. And they And she would tell them, each of them. I mean, I was only there for a couple of them because I had the kids. And she told each of them how much she loved them and how much she had hopes for them for the future, and that she knew they could do anything that they needed and wanted to do. She had total faith in them, and that she would always be there to watch over them, and that they could talk to her anytime, that she could be, they would be assured that they could be reaching her, that she would always be listening for them. And they didn't question how that was possible. They just all sort of nodded that was sort of the way it was. And then she arranged all the details of it. She didn't want us to be worried about how the end was going to be. She didn't want to have it long and drawn out, and for her to be remembered in a sickly way, that she wanted us all to remember her. And she arranged it. She had us all around her when she died. And it was peaceful. I mean, she said her goodbyes. She said how much she cared about each of us and loved us and had time alone with each of us. I mean, I know that my time alone with her was really special. There were a little bit of complications in the early part of it because of her expectations, but it was really a peaceful period of time. And she went the way she wanted, which we don't all get to do. And we all don't think about, how do we want that last chapter of our life to look like? And she really thought about, what does my last chapter look like? What do I want to leave? And how do I want to be remembered? And what do I want them to take from it? She was more concerned about what the impact would be, much more concerned than a lot of people I know. And what she wanted, I think, pretty much was what she got.
What an astounding thing. What an astounding example to have. And to me, too, listening to this story. I think you've said to me before. Go ahead, Fredda.
I was going to say, the one thing that I didn't mention that I think is part of this sort of purposeful and thoughtful approach to life was even going through high school, she and I had the roughest time because she just was a hard model to look up to. Every kid in the neighborhood would be at my house after school because they would rather be there. And I would be saying, if my mother, why would you want to go with my mother? I'd come home from school and there would be my neighbors would be gathered at the house. And it was because partly she was a mother who was home, but it was the way she took to giving advice. So they would come to her with all their, stuff. I used to call her, they lived on Hamlin, Hamlin, Hamlin Road. I used to call her the Pied Piper of Hamlin Road because everybody would go there. And they would go because she would never tell them, like their own parents, here's what you need to do, or listen to your mother, or any of that. She would do exactly the same thing she would do with us, which is give you alternatives, give you a sense of freedom, give you also a sense of what principles might guide where you might go. But that was the way it was. So it was even in that she did it, and I think back, wow, I used to be furious at her, by the way, for gathering those kids there. Like, why should they get to have the goodies of this, Go to your own mother. But they come to mine.
How do you think about that now? Do you kind of feel the same way? Or
no, not at all. I feel like how lucky they were to have another person who could talk to them about stuff and that they could go to. And she never would take a position against their parents or take a position between them in any way. She would just do, and that's such a gift, to not get triangled in between or feel like you have to say something on one side or the other, but just sort of provide space for an openness to have a conversation and to let people discover, which is what she did.
Yeah.
It's a real gift. It was very much a gift.
So turning the tables a little bit and thinking about yourself, what lasting impact do you think she's had on you? And I feel like it's this is a kind of a really incredible, from my perspective, time in your life where you are thinking a lot about women's wisdom and women's stories and maybe your own. And I'm curious how you think about that now, like where she's kind of landed and continues to live through how you live.
Yeah. It's really a very interesting thing. I was saying, I think you and I talked a little bit about this. That remembering her at this stage of my life, I think, is very much influenced. And I wonder sometimes sorting out remembering myself and how I want to be remembered. But I'm going to be 78 tomorrow. And I think that the way I think about myself is very much in terms of being able to accomplish those same things that she sort of seemed to have come naturally to her, which is to think about what's important and how do I want to be remembered. I found myself sharing with my grandchildren that that I don't want to be buried. I want to be cremated, but I wanted them to put me in a place, my grandchildren and my children, that they could come and talk to me regularly. That I wanted to be, and this is my own sort of thing, is that I wanted them to know that they could always know that I would sort of be there. And they always carried me, that whoever you love, you carry with you. And I feel like that's very much the piece from my mother, that, that you carry with you inside the people you love and the love they bring with you. The more I used to say, the more you grieve for someone is more a testament to how much you love them and how much you carry them with you. And I feel very much that she's still with me in a way, and I want the same thing to be true for my family, is that they know that they carry in them the very positives that I've given them, whatever they estimate those to be, and that that they probably carry some of the negatives too. But remembering her with the light of also knowing that I'm trying to think about how I want to be remembered is a really interesting process. I probably would have not remembered her in the same way in my 30s. And, it was more of defining myself within the context of her. But now I feel like the remembrance and thinking about really being thoughtful about how you want to be remembered and knowing that whatever you're doing now is the last chapter. And it's like in writing a book, you want people to have a good last chapter. You want to leave them with something. And last chapters are important, to think about them. And I think she naturally did it. But, I have to focus on it. I have to focus on it more. It doesn't sort of come naturally in the same kind of way I think it came to her. So it's a very, very different experience, I think, than when she naturally did it. But it's there.
You never know, they say, like the duck looks so serene on top of the water.
Right.
It's
paddling frantically underneath. Right. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's true.
As a final question and / opportunity, I'm curious if you did have the chance to talk to your mom again, even though you had what sounds like a very meaningful final conversation with her. At this point in your life, if you had the chance to say something to her again, which it sounds like she's open, her phone lines are open. So what you would say to her now?
Yeah, her phone lines are always open. I'm always aware of that. I remember her on a regular basis. So I think what I would say to her now is probably twofold. One, I would say, is that I appreciated all of those things, the principles that she taught about, not competing, competing in a realistic way, making sure that you're collaborative and cooperative, and that you figure out how to settle things with people and you have conversations, really crucial conversations. That those are all things that I so much appreciate, and letting that the sense of being loved, even if it's not said all the time, that that you are loved and supported. The piece that I would probably also ask her to do would be to say, I wish we had a straighter story. I wish we didn't have to search for your story of the details. Not that it hasn't been it's been sort of interesting searching, but I would love to have had her share those with me and not feel shamed about them. I feel badly that she felt shamed, that a piece of what she did with her 5 kids, and see, it's really just touching, that a piece of what she did as a mother came from her shame as a woman, that she was born into a particular time where who she wanted to be and who she thought of herself or dreamed of being was not actually possible. And so she felt shamed, and shamed that she couldn't have kids when she wanted to have kids, although she went on to have 5. But that's what I would want for her, is that she not have to feel that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that we could know that she felt good about the match between what really led to the shames and who she was as a person. Because it really was, that was a part of her, even though she felt badly about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's always hard because I guess maybe this incredible positive turn of how she decided to mother was in part rooted in the shame. I think about that myself so much with people's stories and the trajectories of people's lives and what they talk about, in projects with us and, just in my personal lives, talking to people that, maybe myself, but also other people wouldn't never get to where they are without, the dirt that happened before that.
Yeah, I think that it's sort of all those little shandas provide a private pathway in our head for where we're going, even if we never speak them and we're ashamed to speak them. They impact us in ways that make us who we are. And I think that's true for her, no different. And it would be the ability, I wish she had the opportunity before she passed away, before she died, to be able to share those and not feel the shame.
I guess that's the invitation for all of us listening. Right?
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing Selma with me in this way, your mom. I really, really appreciated talking about her and sharing her with more people, even if that would have made her slightly or a lot uncomfortable.
Right. But I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to do that. And I think the just more the feeling of doing it, Jamie, I think really speaks to the work that you do and around narrative, that having narrative and getting a chance to talk about it, even if you're talking about somebody else's that you're very connected to, is such an important part of recognizing our humanness and moving it to a place that's really deep.
Yeah. Thanks for saying that.
Well, pleasure.